My name is Marianne, and I'm 45 years old. I never expected that meeting my daughter's fiancé would turn into one of the most humiliating days of my life. For years, I've lived a quiet, content life in my small suburban home. After my husband David passed away 8 years ago, I stopped chasing the rush of city life. I found peace in simplicity, morning walks with coffee in hand, tending to my garden, volunteering at the local shelter. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. I never cared for appearances, I cared for peace. My daughter Alina was my world. She was only 16 when her father died, and watching her blossom into a strong, beautiful young woman has been my greatest joy. She worked hard, graduated college, and landed a respectable job at a marketing firm downtown. I thought life had finally steadied until she called me one Saturday morning with a tremble of excitement in her voice. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," she said. "Someone?" I teased gently. "Or the someone." She giggled. "The someone. His name is Travis. We've been dating for almost a year, and he asked me to marry him last week." For a moment, I just sat there, speechless. My little girl engaged. Joy surged through me, but somewhere beneath it was a faint ripple of worry. Parents always feel it. That instinctive pull to protect their children, even from happiness that comes too fast. Still, I was thrilled to meet him. Alina insisted on dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown. I hesitated at first, it wasn't really my kind of place, but she sounded so eager that I couldn't refuse. "It's perfect, Mom. You'll love it," she said. That evening, I pulled my best dress from the closet, a simple navy blue one that David once said made my eyes sparkle. My shoes weren't designer. My bag wasn't new, but I wore them proudly. I took the bus instead of driving, since parking downtown was always a hassle. The moment I stepped into the restaurant, I could feel the atmosphere shift around me. Elegant people in tailored suits, servers gliding across the marble floors, the faint scent of imported wine, it was all a little overwhelming. Then I saw Alina waving at me from across the room. Her face lit up, and that alone was worth it. Beside her sat a man tall, broad-shouldered, with slicked-back hair and a watch that probably cost more than my car. He stood as I approached, flashing a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, this is Travis," Alina said, almost glowing. "Travis, this is my mother, Marianne." He shook my hand lightly, his grip limp, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am," he said smoothly. His tone was cordial, but his eyes flickered from my shoes to my handbag to my coat, taking mental inventory of everything I wasn't. We sat down, and the conversation began pleasantly enough. He talked a lot about his job in finance, his new apartment in the city, his favorite vacation spots. He had a way of turning every topic toward himself. When I asked about their plans for the future, he smirked slightly. "Oh, Alina won't have to worry about much once we're married. I've got things handled," he said, draping an arm around her shoulders. I smiled politely, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right. It wasn't confidence, it was control. When the waiter came, I noticed how Travis spoke to him condescendingly, like the man was beneath him. I've always believed you can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they treat those who serve them. My gut told me all I needed to know. Throughout the dinner, he dropped little comments that felt like tiny needles. "You live in the suburbs, right? That's cute." Or, "I guess Alina gets her hard-working nature from you, must have been tough raising her alone on a budget." Each word was wrapped in a smile, dipped in false politeness. Alina didn't seem to notice. She was too wrapped up in his charm. I didn't want to ruin her moment, so I swallowed my pride and let it go. When the check came, I reached instinctively for my purse, but Travis chuckled. "Oh no, don't worry about it, Marianne. You can get the next one," he said, his voice dripping with mock generosity. Then, with a smirk, he added, "If it's somewhere in your price range." I froze, unsure if I'd heard correctly. The waiter hesitated too. Glancing, Alina looked at him in disbelief. "Travis, that's not funny," she whispered. He waved it off, laughing as if it were just a harmless joke. "Relax, babe, I'm just teasing." But it wasn't teasing. It was deliberate, pointed humiliation. I felt my cheeks burn, but I forced a smile, unwilling to show him how much it stung. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I barely tasted my dessert. I could only focus on the sound of his laughter, the way he spoke about success like it was a badge of moral superiority. When we finally said goodnight, he shook my hand again, this time with a faint smirk that told me he thought he'd gotten the upper hand. As I walked out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath and lifted my chin. I refused to let a man like him define my worth. Still, his words clung to me like smoke. I laughed it off that night, but little did I know, that was only the beginning of his insults. The first time he called me a nobody was in my own home. A few weeks after that awkward dinner, Alina called again, her voice cheerful as ever. She said she and Travis wanted to stop by my house that Sunday for lunch. Despite the uncomfortable tension I'd felt during our first meeting, I agreed. I wanted to believe maybe I'd misread him. Maybe he'd been nervous or trying too hard to impress me. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt for Alina's sake. That morning, I woke up early to prepare my late husband's favorite dish, homemade lasagna. It was a recipe passed down from my grandmother, the kind that filled the house with warmth and memories. I wanted Travis to see that while my home wasn't luxurious, it was filled with love and history. When they arrived, I met them at the door. Alina hugged me tightly, her smile genuine. Travis stepped inside slowly, his eyes darting around the living room like an appraiser evaluating an antique shop. "This is cozy," he said finally, the words stretching from his mouth like taffy. I smiled politely. "Thank you. It's small, but it's been home for a long time." He glanced at the worn couch, the framed family photos, the old oak table that David built by hand. "Ever think of moving somewhere bigger?" he asked. "I like it here," I replied, keeping my tone light. "I don't need much space. It's just me now." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, I can see that. Alina's not used to this kind of environment anymore. She's grown into a bit of a city girl." Alina nudged him gently, whispering, "Travis." He lifted his hands in mock innocence. "What? I'm just saying it's a different lifestyle." I bit my tongue and busied myself setting the table. He followed me into the kitchen, glancing at the faded wallpaper. "You ever think of remodeling? I know some contractors who could fix this place up. Maybe even tear it down and rebuild something modern. A clean start, you know?" His tone wasn't offering help, it was implying inadequacy. I felt my patience thinning but reminded myself that kindness costs nothing. "I appreciate the thought, Travis," I said calmly. "But this house holds memories. I'm not interested in tearing them down," he smirked. "Right, sentimental value. I get that. I'm just saying sometimes it's good to move on." At lunch, I watched him more closely. He barely complimented the food, only asked if I'd ever considered using real Italian cheese. He sipped his wine and ever looked around as though the house itself offended his sensibilities. Alina tried to fill the silence with small talk about her job, but every time she spoke, Travis interrupted with some remark about how he'd taught her that trick or helped her make better decisions. He was charming in public, but in small spaces like my kitchen, his arrogance showed like cracks beneath polished paint. I asked him how his parents felt about the engagement. "They're thrilled," he said proudly. "My mom's already helping Alina learn how to host properly. You know, entertaining, etiquette, that kind of thing." I smiled, though my chest tightened. "Alina's always been very thoughtful. She doesn't need to change for anyone." He shrugged. "Well, people adapt when they're moving up in the world." Alina's face fell slightly, and I caught it. She wasn't blind, just in love. I wanted to say something, but I knew it wasn't the moment. After lunch, we moved to the living room for coffee. Travis leaned back in his chair and casually asked, "So, what did you do before retiring?" "I still work occasionally," I said. "I handle a few business interests, but I mostly volunteer now." He smirked. "Oh, I see. Volunteer work. That's nice, keeping busy, right?" The way he said it made it sound like a hobby for people with nothing else to do. I met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it keeps me connected to the community." He nodded absently, checking his phone. "Alina, we should get going soon. I've got a client dinner tonight." Before leaving, He walked to the front door and turned to me. "You've done a good job raising her," he said. "I mean, considering the circumstances." "The circumstances?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "You know, being a single mom, limited resources, that kind of thing? She's come a long way. I'll make sure she never has to live like this again." The words hit me like a slap. Alina's eyes widened. "Travis!" she snapped. He laughed it off, lifting his hands. "I'm kidding!" "Don't be so sensitive." But I could see from his smirk that he wasn't joking. He was proud of that jab. They left soon after, Alina apologizing repeatedly as I hugged her goodbye. "Mom, he didn't mean it," she whispered. "He's just awkward sometimes." I smiled, brushing her cheek gently. "It's all right, sweetheart, go on, have a nice evening." When the door closed, the silence of my house felt heavier than usual. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty plates, the half-finished glasses of wine, and the crumbs of lasagna still clinging to the serving dish. My chest tightened, not from anger but from sorrow. How easily people judged by what they saw. The chipped paint, the worn furniture, the quiet way I lived it all became a mirror for their assumptions. But what he didn't know was that behind this modest home stood a woman who'd once built something far greater than he could imagine. I looked around at my little living room, the same one that man had mocked, and whispered to myself, "Let him think what he wants. One day, he'll see." That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, wondering if I'd lost my daughter to a man who saw me as trash. The day he truly humiliated me was the day I went to deliver a gift. A few weeks after that uncomfortable visit, Alina started her new job at Travis's company. She was overjoyed, calling me nearly every night to share her excitement. "Mom, it's such a great opportunity," she said. "Travis helped me get my foot in the door. The office is amazing." I was happy for her, of course, but a small knot of unease settled in my stomach. The idea of her working under him under that kind of arrogance worried me more than I wanted to admit. Still, I decided to be supportive. A few days into her new position, I framed a photo of the three of us, me, Alina, and her late father. It was taken the summer before he died, all of us smiling at the beach. I thought it would be nice for her to have it on her desk, a reminder of where she came from. That afternoon, I dressed neatly, tied my hair back, and took the bus downtown. I wanted the moment to be a surprise, a quiet gesture of love. The skyscraper where she worked was enormous, all glass and marble, filled with people in pressed suits moving with purpose. I felt slightly out of place but kept my head high as I approached the front desk. "Good afternoon," I said kindly. "I'm here to drop off a framed photo for my daughter, Alina Cooper. She works in marketing." The receptionist gave me a polite but hesitant smile. "Oh yes, I know Alina. She's in a meeting right now with Mr. Green, Travis Green." My stomach clenched at his name, but I smiled. "That's all right. I'll just leave this for her." Before I could hand it over, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "What's going on here?" I turned to see Travis striding toward the desk, perfectly put together in a gray suit and silk tie. His expression was calm at first until he saw me. His eyes flickered with annoyance, then disbelief. "Marianne?" he said sharply. "What are you doing here?" I held up the photo with a gentle smile. "Just bringing Alina something for her desk." I didn't mean to interrupt. He looked around, noticing a few employees watching the interaction. His face hardened. "This isn't really an appropriate place for personal drop-offs," he said coldly. "I understand," I replied quietly. "I just wanted to surprise her. I'll be on my way." But he didn't let it go. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for others to hear. "We don't usually allow unannounced visitors, especially solicitors." My heart dropped. "Solicitors?" He smirked faintly. "No offense, but we've had issues with people coming in asking for donations or handing out flyers. You understand." A few people nearby chuckled softly, and the receptionist looked horrified. I felt my face flush hot, my hands trembling around the picture frame. "I'm not," I began, but he cut me off. "It's fine. Just call next time before dropping by. We have image standards here, and I can't have random people walking in. He said it so smoothly, so publicly, that it didn't even sound cruel, just condescendingly professional. But the humiliation was sharp and immediate. Someone at a nearby desk whispered, "That's his fiancé's mom." And the murmurs spread like wildfire. Travis's jaw tightened, clearly realizing his mistake, but instead of apologizing, he straightened his tie and muttered, "We'll talk later." I forced a smile, my throat tight. Of course. My apologies for the intrusion. I turned, clutching the frame tightly, and walked toward the exit as quickly as I could. The moment the building's glass doors closed behind me, I exhaled shakily, tears burning in my eyes. I stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by polished strangers rushing by, and for the first time in years, I felt small. Not because I was poor or powerless, but because a man had decided to make me feel that way in front of others. When I got home, I placed the framed photo on my kitchen counter and just stared at it. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered. I thought of David, how he'd always said dignity wasn't about money or title, but how you carried yourself when others tried to take it away. Later that evening, Alina called, cheerful as usual. "Hey Mom, did you drop by earlier? Travis said you stopped at the office." I hesitated. "I did. I wanted to surprise you with something for your desk." She laughed lightly. "That's sweet." I didn't get it though. Travis said there was a mix-up. A mix-up. That's what he called it. I decided not to tell her what happened, not yet. "It's all right," I said softly. "I'll bring it another time." She paused. "Mom, he didn't mean to be rude or anything, right? He just said it wasn't the best time." I swallowed the truth like poison. "No, honey, it's fine." After we hung up, I sat in silence. The embarrassment was still raw, but beneath it, something new began to form, a quiet fire. I realized it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about how easily people like him believed they could step on others without consequence. I took the photo from the counter, ran my fingers over our smiling faces, and whispered to David's memory, "You always said people reveal themselves in moments of arrogance. I think I've seen enough." That night, something inside me shifted. I decided he would never humiliate me again. If only he knew who I really was. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after the city had gone quiet. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock on the wall, echoing through the stillness of my house. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, tired, older, but far from broken. His words replayed in my mind, cutting deeper each time. Solicitor, image standards, random people. It was astonishing how someone who knew so little about me could feel so entitled to define my worth. I realized that Travis thought he had me all figured out, a widow scraping by in a modest home, clinging to sentimental relics of the past. What he didn't know was that behind every inch of my quiet life lay the foundation of something far greater than he could ever imagine. Before my husband, David, passed away, we built a company together from scratch. It started in our garage, late nights, pizza boxes, and endless lines of code. David was a visionary software developer, and I was the strategist, handling the business side of things. Together, we turned our tiny startup into a thriving tech firm that provided cybersecurity solutions to major corporations. Within a decade, our company became one of the most respected in the region. When David died unexpectedly from a heart attack, I couldn't bear to stay in the public eye. Every meeting, every corporate event, every press interview reminded me of the man who wasn't standing beside me anymore. So, I stepped back. I let my partners and our trusted management team continue running the company while I remained a silent shareholder. I didn't need the spotlight, I just needed peace. My lawyer, Henry, handled most of my business affairs after that. I invested quietly, diversified my portfolio, and donated to several causes anonymously. I didn't flaunt my wealth because it had never been about money for me. It was about building something meaningful, something lasting. Ironically, one of my firm's largest clients over the years had been Travis's own company. They used our software to protect their data infrastructure. He had no idea that the nobody he looked down on had indirectly helped secure his job, the same job he used as a weapon of superiority. A small smile tugged at my lips as I thought about that. Oh, The irony. The next morning, I called Henry. "I need an update on all current holdings," I said, keeping my voice steady. He paused. "Everything all right, Marianne? I just want to be aware of recent acquisitions and our partnerships, especially those connected to Greystone Financial." There was a brief silence on the line. "Interesting you mention that. Our firm recently finalized a merger with one of their primary tech suppliers. You now technically hold a minority ownership stake in a company that directly services Greystone." Greystone. Travis's company. I sat back in my chair, the corners of my mouth lifting slightly. "That's good to know," I said calmly, though inside, a slow, cold satisfaction began to stir. "Would you like me to arrange a meeting with their CEO?" Henry asked. He's been eager to connect since the merger closed. "Yes," I said, my tone crisp. "Let's set that up. I'd like to review some of their operational leadership." After we hung up, I looked around my modest home again, the one Travis had mocked. To him, this was a sign of mediocrity. To me, it was freedom. I didn't live simply because I had to. I lived this way because I chose to. I didn't need the pretense of luxury to validate who I was. Over the next few days, I reviewed company reports and financial documents that confirmed just how deeply my holdings reached. I wasn't just a silent investor anymore. I was a key stakeholder in a chain of businesses that indirectly dictated the success of men like Travis. I thought about Alina. She didn't know the full scope of my career or my investments. When she was younger, I wanted her to live freely, unburdened by legacy or wealth. I wanted her to learn empathy, not entitlement. Maybe I'd succeeded in that, but perhaps too well. Because now, she couldn't see the difference between humility and humiliation. I knew it wasn't time to reveal everything just yet. Revenge, I decided, shouldn't come from rage. It should come from balance, from timing, precision, and justice. Later that evening, as I sipped tea by the window, I replayed every insult he'd thrown at me. The smirk when he called my home quaint, the mocking tone at the restaurant, the cruel sneer in front of his colleagues. I felt the burn of each one. But this time, it didn't make me wilt, it made me sharper. "David," I whispered softly, gazing at the framed photo of him on the mantel. "I think it's time I stopped letting people mistake kindness for weakness." The air in the room felt different after that, heavier, charged. I had spent years blending into the background, content to live quietly. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to remind the world and one arrogant young man in particular who Marianne Cooper really was. I smiled for the first time in weeks, knowing karma had just handed me the perfect stage. Revenge wasn't about yelling, it was about timing. In the days that followed, I carried myself as if nothing had changed. On the outside, I was still the quiet widow who spent her mornings gardening and her evenings reading. But inside, I was plotting with precision. Every move had to be deliberate, measured not by anger but by consequence. The first step was information. I contacted Henry again, my longtime lawyer and confidant. "Henry," I said over the phone, "I'd like to schedule a formal meeting with the CEO of Greystone Financial." He hesitated for a moment. "That's Travis's company, correct?" "Yes," I replied, a hint of steel in my tone. "But don't mention my personal connection to anyone there. This is purely business." "Understood," he said quickly. "I'll arrange something discreetly. You'll have full access to review their leadership and partnership files." The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I didn't tell Alina. I didn't even hint at what I was planning. She still believed Travis was the charming, ambitious man she'd fallen for. I knew she'd see the truth soon enough, but for now, my silence was a shield. When Thursday came, I dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit that hadn't seen daylight in years. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a different woman than the one Travis had mocked. My hair was neatly pinned, my posture straight, my expression calm and purposeful. I wasn't walking into that meeting as a mother, I was walking in as the woman who had once built a company from nothing. The CEO of Greystone, a man named Alan Peters, greeted me warmly in his glass-walled office overlooking the skyline. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "it's an honor. I've heard incredible things about your firm's acquisition performance. I didn't realize you were involved with the cybersecurity side of our partnerships." I prefer to stay behind the scenes, I replied with a polite smile. But I wanted to discuss our new alignment, particularly your leadership structure and how certain departments are being managed. Alan nodded, intrigued. Of course. Is there a specific department you'd like to focus on? Yes, I said evenly. The investment analytics division. That was Travis's department. Alan pulled up files on his screen. Travis Green. Promising, but a bit brash, he admitted with a smirk. He's been lobbying for a senior promotion. We've had mixed feedback about his management style. I took mental note of every word. Perhaps it's time for a closer look, I suggested. An independent performance review and internal audit of his department's efficiency and ethics. It's standard after a merger. Alan leaned back thoughtfully. That's a reasonable request. I can authorize it under compliance. You'll have full oversight if you'd like. Perfect, I said smoothly. Discretion, of course. Of course, he agreed. By the time I left the building, the sun was setting across the city skyline, bathing the towers in gold. I paused for a moment on the sidewalk, watching people rush home, each one lost in their own little world. None of them knew that somewhere inside those tall glass walls, a quiet storm had just been set in motion. That evening, Alina called again. Mom, Travis wants to have dinner with you, she said hesitantly. He feels bad about what happened at the office. He thinks maybe it came across wrong. I almost laughed at the irony. Oh? And what does he want to talk about? Just to make peace, she said softly. He knows you're upset. I smiled to myself. Upset? No. Focused? Absolutely. All right, dear, I said calmly. Tell him I'd love to join. Thank you both for dinner. We met 2 nights later at a sleek new restaurant downtown. Travis arrived in his usual fashion, impeccably dressed, dripping confidence. Alina looked radiant, unaware of the game unfolding before her. Travis greeted me with that same rehearsed smile. Marianne, he said warmly, thank you for coming. I wanted to clear the air. Of course, I said, keeping my tone kind but distant. No harm done. He launched into a polished speech about misunderstanding, about pressure at work, about how he never meant to sound disrespectful. I nodded through it all, watching the cracks in his composure whenever I met his gaze too long. He didn't like not being in control of the conversation. Between sips of wine, he began bragging again about how he was up for a major promotion, how the firm's board had their eyes on him. He spoke like a man who believed his future was secure, his power unquestioned. I smiled faintly. That's wonderful, Travis, I said. I'm sure the company sees your true potential. He straightened, pleased with himself. They do, he said confidently. I've worked hard for it. I leaned back in my chair, swirling my wine slowly. Hard work always pays off, I said softly, as long as the foundation is honest. For a moment, his smile faltered. It was small, barely noticeable, but I caught it. When dinner ended, Alina kissed me goodbye and thanked me for giving him another chance. Travis shook my hand and said, I'm glad we can move past that awkwardness. I looked him straight in the eye and said, Oh, we will, very soon. He smiled, completely oblivious. As they walked away, I stood beneath the soft glow of the restaurant lights, watching them disappear into the night. My pulse was steady, my purpose clear. He thought this dinner had restored his image in my eyes. What he didn't know was that the wheels were already turning in places far above his reach. He had no idea how prophetic that line would turn out to be. The night of our dinner, I decided to stop playing the humble widow. By the time our next dinner came around, things had already started to shift behind the scenes. The internal audit I'd requested at Greystone Financial had quietly begun. I received regular updates from Alan and Henry, both confirming what I already suspected. Travis's leadership style was as reckless as it was arrogant. He'd authorized deals without approval, misreported figures, and taken credit for the work of his subordinates. His entire department was held together with polished reports and inflated charm. But I didn't want to confront him through paperwork. I wanted to look him in the eye when he realized who he was really dealing with. Alina called one afternoon and said, Mom, we should have dinner again soon. Travis wants to show you he's really changed. I smiled faintly. Oh, I'd like that, I replied. Let's meet at La Valora, she gasped. That place? Mom, that's where we first introduced you to Travis. Exactly, I said. And though she didn't hear it, there was an edge to my tone. It feels fitting. That evening, I didn't wear my usual modest clothes. I wore a tailored midnight blue dress, simple but elegant, paired with diamond earrings that had belonged to David's mother. My hair was sleek, my posture strong. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see the woman Travis had sneered at. I saw the woman who once commanded boardrooms, who negotiated million-dollar contracts, who never needed anyone's approval. When I arrived at the restaurant, the valet greeted me warmly. "Good evening, Mrs. Cooper," he said, bowing slightly. "Your car will be parked up front as requested." "Thank you," I replied with a smile. The car in question wasn't my usual sedan, it was my late husband's restored vintage Mercedes. Elegant, understated, powerful. Much like the message I intended to send. Inside, Alina's eyes widened the moment she saw me. "Mom, wow, you look incredible." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, kissing her cheek. Travis stood awkwardly, his eyes darting between me and the valet outside. "Nice car," he said after a beat. "Did you rent it?" I smiled politely. "No. It's part of my collection." He blinked. Caught off guard. "Collection?" "Yes. I've always loved classic cars. They remind me of the value of things built to last." He laughed uneasily, unsure if I was joking. "Right." As we sat down, I could see him studying me, the dress, the jewelry, the quiet confidence. His smirk wavered for the first time. I didn't say much at first. I let the silence do the work. People like him hate silence because it gives them no room to perform. The waiter arrived, and I ordered a bottle of wine, an expensive vintage that made Travis raise his eyebrows. "That's quite a choice," he said. I looked him in the eye. "It's one of my favorites. I learned to appreciate it during a partnership dinner with your CEO, actually." The color drained slightly from his face. "Alan Peters?" he asked, cautious. I took a slow sip of water. "Yes. He's a very insightful man. We've had several discussions lately about company ethics and leadership accountability." He shifted in his seat. "Oh, well, Alan's great. I've met him a few times." "I know," I said, smiling. "He mentioned you." Alina looked between us, her brow furrowed. "Wait, Mom, you know Alan Peters?" "Yes, dear. Our firms recently completed a merger. It's part of a larger network I oversee." I paused, watching Travis closely. Travis's department happens to fall under that network. For the first time since I'd met him, Travis was speechless. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. I continued casually, as if discussing the weather. "He's quite fond of the bro. New performance audit your team is going through, by the way. Says it's bringing some much-needed clarity." He swallowed hard, trying to mask the panic flickering in his eyes. "Audit?" he said weakly. "I hadn't heard anything official." I smiled. "You will." The rest of the meal was painfully quiet. Alina, confused and uneasy, tried to lighten the mood. But the tension was palpable. Travis barely touched his food, his mind clearly racing. After dessert, I placed my napkin neatly on the table and looked directly at him. "Travis," I said softly, "you once told me success is about knowing your worth." I couldn't agree more. But sometimes, knowing your worth means reminding others not to underestimate you. He nodded stiffly, his jaw clenched. "Of course," he muttered. I stood, smoothing my dress. "It was lovely seeing you both again. Drive safe, dear," I told Alina gently, then turned to Travis with a calm, knowing look. "And good luck at work this week." "I think you'll need it." He didn't respond. He couldn't. As I walked out of the restaurant, the valet handed me my keys with a respectful nod. The night air was cool, the city lights glimmering off the hood of the car as I slid into the driver's seat. I could see them through the window. Alina confused. Travis pale and silent. For the first time since his insults began, he wasn't laughing, he wasn't sneering, he wasn't in control. For the first time, he looked at me not with arrogance but with fear. The next day, the tables began to turn. The morning after that dinner, I woke up earlier than usual. The air felt different, charged, purposeful. The stage was set, and for once, I didn't feel like the quiet widow anymore. I was back in my element, the world of strategy, structure, and consequence. When I arrived at my office downtown, a small, discreet suite where I managed my investments, Henry was already there, sipping coffee and reviewing files. He smiled knowingly when I walked in. "So," he said, "how was dinner?" "Informative," I replied, placing my purse down. He knows now, not everything but enough to make him sweat. Henry chuckled. "Good, that'll make the audit far more interesting." He handed me a folder marked Confidential Greystone Financial Internal Review. Inside were summaries of preliminary findings from Travis's department. As I skimmed through the pages, I saw it all: irregular budget allocations, client complaints, falsified approval signatures. It was worse than I expected. Alan's team found enough inconsistencies to warrant a deeper dive, Henry explained. They're moving forward with interviews and financial verifications this week. I nodded. "Keep it quiet. I don't want him realizing I'm involved until it's too late." "Understood," Henry said, leaning back in his chair. "You know, Marianne, this could ruin him completely." I looked out the window, watching the city pulse with life below. "No, Henry, I don't want to ruin him. I just want him to see what happens when you mistake grace for weakness." Meanwhile, at Greystone, the audit began. I didn't need to be there to see the panic unfolding. I could imagine it perfectly. Travis, strutting through the halls one day, only to be summoned by compliance the next. His co-workers whispering, his assistant avoiding eye contact. The man who once looked down on me was now under a microscope. Alan called me 2 days later. "You were right," he said bluntly. "We've found several procedural violations in Green's reports. He's been cutting corners, possibly to inflate his team's quarterly performance. Keep the investigation formal," I said calmly. "And thorough. No favoritism, no shortcuts." "Of course," Alan replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "You're remarkably composed about all this, Mrs. Cooper." "Position would want blood." I smiled faintly. "Revenge isn't about destruction, Alan. It's about revelation." That same afternoon, Alina called. Her voice was nervous. "Mom, have you talked to Travis lately? He's been acting strange. Stressed, distracted. He barely sleeps." I played innocent. "Oh? Maybe work's getting to him. The corporate world can be harsh." She sighed. "He keeps saying something about an audit or review. He thinks someone's trying to sabotage him." I kept my tone soft. "I'm sure it's just business as usual, sweetheart. Don't worry yourself." She hesitated. "He said the CEO's been looking at his department specifically." "I don't know, Mom. I feel like there's something he's not telling me." "There was, but it wasn't my place to reveal it." "Not yet. Just give him space," I said gently. "Sometimes, people show who they are when they're under pressure." Over the next week, things began unraveling faster than I'd anticipated. Reports surfaced that Travis had been taking credit for team projects, manipulating figures to boost his numbers, even using company funds for client entertainment that couldn't be verified. Each revelation stripped away another layer of the man who'd once smirked at my modest home. Alan kept me informed every step of the way. "We're scheduling a board review next week," he told me. "Once we present the findings, his position will be in serious jeopardy." "Invite me," I said calmly. Quietly. He hesitated, then agreed. "I'll make sure you're in the room." By the time the day of the review arrived, Travis was spiraling. Alina called again, her voice breaking. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening. He's so angry all the time. He keeps saying someone's after him." I listened quietly, my heart aching for her. "Alina, sometimes life has a way of showing us who people really are. Don't ignore what you see," She didn't answer. I knew she was struggling, torn between love and truth. But soon, she'd have no choice but to see him for what he was. At the board review, I sat quietly near the back of the room, dressed in a neutral beige suit, anonymous among the executives. Travis entered late, pale and tense, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He glanced around the room, unaware that I was sitting there, watching. Alan led the meeting, laying out the audit's findings one by one: unauthorized expenses, false approvals, misused company funds. With each slide, I saw Travis's confidence crumble. He tried to defend himself, claiming misunderstandings, blaming subordinates, insisting it was all normal business practice. But his words fell flat. When Alan finished, he said evenly, "Mr. Green, we'll be conducting a full disciplinary review. Effective immediately, your promotion is suspended pending further investigation." Travis's jaw clenched. "You can't do this. I've been one of your top performers for 2 years." Alan didn't flinch. "You've also been one of our most careless." The room went silent. I sat still, watching him, remembering every sneer, every laugh, every insult. He looked nothing like the man who'd once mocked me for being below his standards. As the meeting ended, I quietly stood and left before he could notice me. My heart wasn't pounding with excitement or triumph, just calm satisfaction. The balance had shifted. I didn't rejoice yet. I wanted him to face me before he fell. When I opened the door, I saw a very different man standing there. It was a gray Saturday morning when I heard the knock. The sound startled me sharp, hurried, anxious. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Alina usually called before visiting. When I opened the door, I froze. There he was, Travis. But the man on my doorstep barely resembled the one who had once sneered at me over dinner. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie undone, his hair disheveled. His confidence was gone, replaced by a haunted, desperate look. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Rain drizzled behind him, soaking the shoulders of his jacket. "Marianne," he finally said, his voice low and strained. "Please, can I come in?" I stepped aside silently, motioning for him to enter. He hesitated, then walked in slowly, glancing around the same modest home he'd once mocked. His eyes didn't carry arrogance this time, only regret. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my voice calm, almost detached. He nodded without meeting my gaze. "Sure." While I boiled water, he stood in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. I could see him studying the picture of David, the one where he's holding baby Alina in his arms. There was something hollow in Travis's eyes when he turned back to me. "I didn't know," he murmured, "about any of it." I placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat across the table. "Didn't know about what?" He rubbed his temples. "The audit. The merger. You." He looked up, his expression pleading. "I swear I didn't know who you were." I took a slow sip of tea, letting silence stretch between us. "And would it have mattered if you did?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" I set the cup down carefully. "If you'd known I was wealthy, powerful, connected, would you have treated me differently?" He didn't answer right away. His lips parted, then closed again. The silence was answer enough. Finally, he sighed, slumping forward. "Probably, yes." His honesty was ugly, but it was truth. "I messed up," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "They're saying I falsified reports, that I misused funds. I didn't mean for it to go that far, I just wanted to look good. I wanted the promotion. I thought that's what success was about." "You mean appearances?" I said softly. "That's what mattered to you." He nodded weakly. "I thought, if I looked like I had it all together, people would respect me. That's what my father always said, never look small, never look weak. I guess I took it too literally." I watched him closely, measuring every word. There was no pride left in him. Just exhaustion. Fear. The kind of fear that only comes when someone realizes the illusion of control has shattered. "You hurt Alina," I said quietly, "and you tried to humiliate me not once, but several times. Why?" He looked down. "Because I saw what I didn't want to be." he whispered. Simple. Content. I thought you were lesser, poor, weak, and that terrified me. I was raised to think success meant more money, better clothes, higher status. But sitting here now, I'd give anything to feel half as calm as you do right now. His confession hung in the air like heavy fog. After a moment, I said, You're right, I am calm, because I've already fought the battles you're just beginning to understand. And I learned that power isn't something you flash in people's faces, it's something you carry quietly, knowing you don't have to prove it. He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. They're suspending me, he admitted. Alan said there'll be a review. I'll probably lose my job. And Alina. His voice broke. She barely talks to me. I think she knows something's wrong. She does, I said simply. And soon she'll know everything. He swallowed hard, staring at me. You did this, didn't you? I met his gaze evenly. I initiated the audit, yes. The words hit him like a slap. He sat back, stunned. You started it? I nodded. Your company merged with one of my subsidiaries. I reviewed leadership integrity. You were part of that process. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His face went pale. You mean, I'm one of the board's private partners, I said calmly. I have oversight of the audit team. I didn't lie, Travis. I simply didn't tell you who I was. You assumed you knew me. He stared at me in silence for what felt like a full minute. Then, almost whispering, he said, All this time I thought you were just some woman living in a tiny house. I am some woman living in a tiny house, I said softly. The difference is, I know who I am and you don't. He lowered his head into his hands, breathing shakily. I could see the weight of humiliation settling over him, but this time it wasn't cruel. It was cleansing, the first honest emotion I'd ever seen from him. After a long pause, he said, I don't expect forgiveness. Good, I replied. Because forgiveness isn't what you came here for. You came here for understanding and maybe a chance to start facing yourself. He looked up slowly, eyes red. You're right. I stood, walking toward the door. You should go, Travis. You've got a lot to fix. Start with the man in the mirror. He rose to his feet, hesitated, then said quietly, For what it's worth, you're nothing like what I thought you were. I smiled faintly. No, Travis. I'm exactly what you thought I wasn't. He left without another word. I watched him walk down the driveway. Shoulders heavy. Steps slow. The rain had stopped. But he didn't notice. For the first time, he realized the homeless nobody had built the empire that controlled his career. His silence that day was more satisfying than any apology. For 2 days after that unexpected visit, I didn't hear from Travis. The house was quiet again, filled with the comforting sounds of ordinary life, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the soft rustle of wind through my curtains. But beneath that calm, I could feel the ripple of change moving through the world outside my walls. Word had spread within Greystone Financial. Travis's name was no longer associated as with promise or potential, it was now synonymous with deceit, vanity, and failure. On the third morning, I received a call from Alan Peters. Marianne, he said, his tone businesslike but not unkind. The board met today. After reviewing the findings, we've decided to suspend Travis Green indefinitely pending termination. You were right, his arrogance compromised his judgment. I thanked him for the update and hung up, feeling neither joy nor pity. Just closure. That same afternoon, my doorbell rang again. This time, when I opened the door, I wasn't surprised to see him standing there. He looked even worse than before, eyes hollow, jaw tight, a deep exhaustion hanging over him. He didn't wait for an invitation, he just whispered, Please, can I talk to you? I nodded and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, the weight of defeat pressing down on him. He sat on the edge of the couch like a man unsure if he deserved to rest. They fired me, he said quietly. Or, well, they're calling it a suspension, but it's over, I know it. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. I wasn't going to make it easy for him to unburden himself. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You don't have to say anything. I know I deserve it. But I need to understand. Why did you do it? I tilted my head. Do what? Exactly. Start the audit, he said bitterly. Expose me. Expose you? I repeated, my tone measured. Travis, I didn't expose you. You did that all by yourself. I simply allowed the truth to breathe. He frowned, his voice cracking. I never meant to hurt Alina. Or you. I met his gaze steadily. Intentions don't erase consequences. You humiliated me in public. You called me a nobody. You mocked the house where my late husband built every wall by hand. You looked at me and saw someone beneath you. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. And the worst part, I continued, is that you didn't do it out of hatred. You did it out of pride. Because somewhere deep inside, you thought you were better. But now you know how fragile that illusion really is. He dropped his head into his hands. You're right, he whispered. Everything you're saying, you're right. I thought money made me untouchable. I thought charm could cover my flaws. I thought appearances mattered more than integrity. I said nothing for a while, letting his words settle. Then I stood, walked over to the desk, and pulled out a sealed envelope. This arrived this morning, I said, handing it to him. He looked at it hesitantly, then tore it open. Inside was a formal letter from Greystone's HR department confirming his suspension without pay and pending review for termination due to misconduct. His eyes scanned the page, his lips trembling. This is it, he said quietly. It's really over. Yes, I said. It is. He sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the letter as though it might rewrite itself if he stared long enough. Then he said, almost to himself, I've lost everything. I walked back to my seat. No, Travis. You've lost the illusion. The version of yourself that believed cruelty was confidence, that believed belittling others made you powerful. But you still have something left, the chance to become someone decent. He looked up at me, eyes red, voice small. Do you really think I can? I gave a faint smile. Only if you start seeing people for who they are, not what they own. At that moment, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart tightened, Alina. The front door opened before I could stop her. She froze when she saw him sitting there, the letter in his hands, his face pale and defeated. Mom, she said slowly, her voice confused. What's going on? Travis stood, but he couldn't even look her in the eye. I think your mother should explain, he muttered. I took a deep breath. Alina, I didn't want to hurt you, but you needed to know the truth about the man you were about to marry. Travis's company merged with one of my firms. I discovered irregularities in his department, dishonesty, mismanagement, and ego-driven negligence. I ordered an audit. Her eyes widened. Wait, you're part of the merger? Yes, I said simply. And when I realized the kind of man your fiancé truly was, I had to let the truth come out. She turned to Travis, her voice trembling. Is it true? He hesitated. His mouth opened, but no excuses came. He nodded. It's true. Her hand went to her mouth. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but instead, she took a slow breath and whispered, I defended you. I told my mom she misunderstood you. I know, he said weakly, and I didn't deserve it. She turned toward me, tears pooling in her eyes. Mom, you were right. All along. I reached out and took her hand gently. I didn't want to be right, sweetheart. I just wanted you to see clearly. Travis stood there, lost, stripped of all the arrogance that once defined him. For the first time, he didn't look like a man who'd lost his career. He looked like a man who'd lost himself. He turned to me slowly. I'm sorry, Marianne, he said, voice breaking. For everything. You didn't deserve what I said, what I did. I nodded once. No, I didn't. But maybe you needed to fall this far to learn humility. He looked at Alina one last time, tears shining in his eyes. I'm so sorry, he whispered. Then, Quietly, he left. The door closed behind him, and silence filled the room again. Alina sank onto the couch beside me, her hand trembling in mine. In that moment, she saw the kind of man she was about to marry, and the kind of woman her mother truly was. Alina cried not because of his downfall, but because of her blindness. After Travis left, the air in the room felt heavy, as if every unspoken word he'd dropped still lingered there. Alina sat beside me on the couch, silent, staring at the letter he had left behind on the table. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up and skimmed the words again, as if rereading them could change the outcome. "Suspended pending termination," she whispered under her breath, her voice almost breaking. "I can't believe this. I thought he was good." I looked at her gently. "You wanted to believe in him, sweetheart. That's not a flaw. It just means you have a kind heart." She shook her head. "No. It means I was naive." There was a long silence. I watched her. The same little girl I'd once held through heartbreaks and scraped knees. Now a woman confronting her first betrayal as an adult. It was painful to see her crumble, but it was necessary. Growth rarely comes without a fracture first. She finally turned to me, eyes red. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? When he insulted you, why didn't you say something?" I sighed. "Because you loved him. And when people are in love, they don't listen to warnings, they listen to hope. I wanted you to see him with your own eyes, not through mine." Her lip quivered. "You let him humiliate you." "Yes," I said quietly. "I let him think he could. Sometimes, it's better to let arrogance expose itself than to fight it head on. People like Travis only learn when their own reflection turns against them." She rubbed her eyes, shaking her head. "He fooled me, Mom. He said all the right things. He made me feel like I was building something real." I took her hand gently. "He didn't fool you, Alina. He fooled himself. He thought he could build a future on pride. You were just caught in the illusion he built around himself." She started crying, then soft at first, then deeper, heavier sobs that came from the heart. I didn't stop her. I simply held her as the storm passed. When she finally calmed, she whispered, "I thought you'd hate me for not standing up for you." I smiled faintly. "Never. I was young once, too. I made mistakes for love. The important thing is that you learned something from this about him, about people, and about yourself." She looked at me, her tear-streaked face filled with a kind of fragile clarity. "You were never weak, were you?" I chuckled softly. "No, darling. I just stopped needing to prove I was strong." She let out a shaky laugh through her tears. "You taught him a lesson I couldn't even dream of giving." I shook my head. "No. Life taught him. I just set the mirror in front of him." The rest of that evening, we talked for hours. About her relationship, about how easily charm can mask control, and how sometimes people love the idea of someone more than the person themselves. I shared stories about her father, how he used to say that true strength isn't loud, it's steady, that you don't need to roar to be powerful. Alina listened quietly, her head resting on my shoulder. The child in her was gone. What sat beside me was a woman beginning to understand herself, fragile but rising. At one point, she whispered, "I don't even want the ring anymore." She slipped the engagement ring off her finger, staring at it for a moment before placing it on the coffee table. "He gave this to me with a speech about how we'd build an empire together. Turns out he was only ever building one for himself." I picked up the ring, turning it over between my fingers. "Empires built on arrogance always collapse," I said softly, setting it down again. She nodded slowly. "I think I'm done with him. Completely." The relief in her tone was faint but real, the first breath of freedom. That night, Alina decided to stay. We made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the rain ease into a quiet drizzle. The garden smelled like wet soil and jasmine. For the first time in months, she looked peaceful. "Mom?" she said after a while. "Yes, dear?" I think I forgot who I was when I was with him. I tried so hard to fit into his world that I stopped recognizing mine. I reached over, taking her hand. "Then it's time to start over, on your terms." Build a life where you never have to shrink yourself for anyone again." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening under the soft porch light. "I think I finally understand what Dad meant when he said you were the strongest woman he knew." That made me laugh softly, the kind of laugh that comes from relief rather than humor. "Strength isn't something we wear, Alina. It's something we grow into." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside was quiet, calm, and for once, so were we. For the first time in years, my daughter and I truly saw each other. News of Travis's downfall spread faster than I expected. Within a week, the whispers began. Greystone Financial was a hive of gossip, and no secret could stay buried there for long. By Monday, Travis's suspension was all anyone could talk about. His name was mentioned in hushed tones in the elevators, over coffee machines, in the halls where he once strutted like a peacock. The man who had bragged about being untouchable had suddenly become the perfect cautionary tale. Henry called me one afternoon with a tone that was both amused and impressed. "You've certainly made an impression, Marianne." The audit report reached the boardroom floor in record time. Alan said it's one of the cleanest investigations they've ever had. I smiled slightly, stirring sugar into my tea. "I didn't want revenge, Henry. I just wanted clarity." He chuckled. "Well, you got both." As the corporate dust settled, I started hearing small updates through professional channels, the polite, detached sort that come with business. Reports. Travis had resigned before the board could officially terminate him. His department was being restructured, his projects reassigned. Greystone's CEO personally thanked me for my integrity and insight, inviting me to join their advisory board to help oversee future acquisitions. It was tempting to refuse, to retreat back into my quiet life, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had sat silently at that dinner table months ago, letting a smug young man chip away at her dignity. I had rediscovered the version of myself that thrived in leadership, calm, deliberate, and unafraid. When Alan called to make the offer official, I said yes. "But," I added, "my name should not be used publicly. I prefer to keep my involvement confidential." "Understood," he replied. "Some power works best in silence." And that was how I liked it. Meanwhile, Alina was finding her footing again. She threw herself into her work, but this time, it wasn't to impress anyone, it was to rebuild herself. She left Greystone and started her own marketing consultancy, small but promising. I helped her draft her first business plan, watched her choose her logo and design her website. She reminded me so much of David in those moments, thoughtful, methodical, determined. One night, she came over for dinner and told me, "Mom, I've learned more in these last few months than in all my years working for other people. About who I am, what I deserve." I smiled proudly. "Good." Then something good came from all of this. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "He's been texting me. Travis. He says he wants to apologize again. That he's found a new job at a smaller firm." I looked up from my plate. "And what did you say?" "I didn't reply," she said quietly. "I don't need closure anymore." I nodded in approval. "That's growth, sweetheart. Sometimes, silence is the only closure worth giving." Over the following weeks, things began to settle back into rhythm. My days were once again filled with Calm the Garden, the morning news, a few business meetings that reminded me I still belonged in that world when I chose to be. My nights were quieter, but not lonely. I'd stopped mourning the years I'd spent fading into the background and started appreciating the strength that came from re-emerging. Occasionally, I'd get emails from Greystone professional updates, summaries, or thanks for my advisory input. One of them included a note from Alan that made me pause. He wrote, "Every company needs people like you, the ones who remind us that leadership isn't loud. It's accountable." I reread that line several times, smiling faintly. Accountability. That was the word Travis had never learned. One afternoon, while organizing old papers in my office, I found the framed photo I'd tried to give Alina months earlier, the one that started everything. The picture of me, David, and our daughter smiling by the sea. I hadn't looked at it since that humiliating day in Travis's office. The memory still stung, but now it felt distant, almost unreal. I dusted the frame gently and set it on my desk. That image, once a symbol of shame, now felt like proof that no insult, no judgment, no act of arrogance could erase who I really was. A few days later, I attended my first official advisory meeting at Greystone. Walking through those same glass doors where I'd once been dismissed as a solicitor, I held my head high. No one recognized me. Of course, to them, I was just another executive consultant, but I knew. And the memory of that moment, standing in the same lobby that had once been the stage of my humiliation, felt like a private victory no applause could match. After the meeting, I stepped outside and looked up at the towering building, its mirrored windows catching the sunlight. I thought of Travis, somewhere out there starting over. Maybe, just maybe, he'd learned something too. That night, as Alina and I sat together over dinner, she said quietly, "You know, Mom, I think you got your revenge." I smiled softly, shaking my head. "No, sweetheart. Revenge is for people who want to hurt others. I didn't hurt him, I showed him the truth. What he does with that truth is his choice." She smiled, her eyes filled with admiration. "You taught him a lesson no one else ever could." I reached across the table, taking her hand. "Maybe, but more importantly, I taught you one. Never let anyone decide your worth." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. As the evening light faded across the kitchen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. As for me, I finally felt at peace knowing I didn't just win, I taught. A year later, fate decided to give me one more look at him. Time has a strange way of healing the edges of pain while sharpening the clarity of memory. A full year had passed since the chaos surrounding Travis's downfall, and life had found its rhythm again. Alina's business was thriving. She'd hired 2 assistants, landed several steady clients, and was finally living on her own terms. Watching her rebuild herself with quiet confidence filled me with pride. As for me, I had kept my promise to remain semi-retired. I attended advisory meetings when necessary, offered insight when asked, and then slipped back into the background. I didn't crave recognition. My satisfaction came from watching balance restored where arrogance once ruled. It was late spring when I received an invitation to a charity gala in the city, an event supporting women entrepreneurs. Alan Peters had personally asked me to attend as a guest speaker. "We could use someone like you," he'd said. "Someone who knows how to rise with grace." I almost declined, but Alina convinced me otherwise. "Mom, you've helped so many people quietly," she said. "It's the time others see the woman behind the work." So, I went. The ballroom was exquisite chandeliers dripping with light, tables dressed in white linen, the hum of conversation blending with soft classical music. It had been years since I'd stood in a room like that, but I didn't feel out of place anymore. I'd earned every bit of the confidence I carried. Halfway through the evening, while mingling with a few business partners, I caught sight of a familiar face across the room. My breath caught for just a moment. It was Travis. He looked different. The sharpness that once defined him was gone. His hair was shorter, his posture less proud, his suit simple but neat. He was talking to a vendor near one of the product displays, wearing a name tag that read, "Travis Green, Logistics Coordinator, Eastfield Consulting," a smaller firm, a smaller title. But something about his demeanor told me he'd learned the value of humility. For a moment, I debated whether to approach him. I didn't owe him anything, not a conversation, not closure, not acknowledgement. But life has a funny way of giving us full circles, and sometimes, grace is best delivered in person. I waited until he finished speaking with a client and turned to leave the booth. When his eyes met mine, he froze. His lips parted slightly, his breath catching like he'd seen a ghost. "Mrs. Cooper," he said finally, his voice quiet, cautious. I smiled politely. "Hello, Travis. It's been a while." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "It has." There was a pause, a heavy one, filled with everything unspoken between us, the arrogance, the humiliation, the lesson. "You look well," I said. He laughed softly, a sound stripped of bravado. "I'm trying. It's been a rough year, but I guess I needed it." "I heard you joined Eastfield Consulting." I said. Honest leadership. He looked surprised that I knew. Yes. They took a chance on me. I started from the bottom again. It's humbling. I nodded approvingly. Humility tends to be life's best teacher. He gave a faint smile. You were right about everything, you know. About appearances, about pride. I used to think power meant being above people. But the truth is, I didn't have real power, I had fear. I was afraid to look small, so I made others feel smaller. His honesty disarmed me. I studied him quietly. The Travis who had stood in my doorway that rainy day had been broken. The one standing in front of me now wasn't broken anymore, just rebuilt. I owe you an apology, he said finally. A real one. Not the kind people give because they're caught, but the kind that comes from understanding. You didn't deserve the way I treated you, neither did Alina. I nodded once. She's doing well, by the way. Running her own business now. His eyes softened. I know. I saw her feature in that local business magazine last month. She deserves every bit of her success. I tilted my head. And you? What do you deserve now? He exhaled deeply. A chance to start over. Not to prove anything to anyone, just to live right this time. For a long moment, we stood in silence amid the hum of laughter and the clinking of glasses. Then I reached out my hand. Well then, I hope you do. He looked at my hand, almost hesitant, then shook it. His grip was steady, not the limp, performative handshake from our first meeting, but one filled with sincerity. Thank you, he said quietly, for not destroying me completely. You could have, but you didn't. I smiled faintly. Destruction doesn't teach, reflection does. He nodded, eyes glistening with something that might have been gratitude or shame or both. I'll never forget what you taught me. As he walked away, blending into the crowd, I felt an odd peace settle over me. Not triumph, not vindication, just a quiet satisfaction that the circle had closed. The man who once called me a homeless nobody now carried the weight of that lesson in every step he took. When Alan later introduced me to the audience for my short speech, I glanced around the room, my gaze briefly landing where Travis had stood. He was gone. But his absence spoke volumes. That night, as I left the gala and stepped into the cool spring air, the city lights glittered like scattered memories. I thought about how strange it was, how humiliation, when met with composure, could become a bridge to wisdom. As he walked away, I knew the power had shifted forever. I realized revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about revelation. After that night at the gala, life moved forward in a calm, graceful rhythm. There were no dramatic endings, no fiery confrontations, just the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing justice had already been done. I didn't need to chase closure anymore. It had come to me on its own terms. My role on the advisory board continued to grow, though I remained deliberately discreet. I wasn't interested in titles or recognition, those were for people who needed validation. I'd learned that true influence didn't require applause. It worked best when it moved silently behind the curtain, shaping outcomes without demanding attention. Alan often joked that I was the board's quiet conscience. I liked that. It suited me. I had no desire to become the face of anything again. I'd lived that life once, long ago, with David by my side. Now, I preferred to build from the shadows, guiding others to stand taller, wiser, and kinder than the man who once mocked me. Alina's business blossomed faster than either of us expected. Within a year, she had a small office space downtown, 3 employees, and a steady stream of clients. She named her company Everline Creative. When I asked why, she said, because no line should ever end when women support each other, it just continues, endlessly. I couldn't have been prouder. She started giving talks at community centers about empowerment, confidence, and resilience. I attended one of her sessions quietly, sitting in the back row. Watching her speak with passion and purpose, I saw the same spark David once had, and perhaps a bit of mine too. She spoke about overcoming toxic relationships, reclaiming self-worth, and finding strength in humility. It wasn't just a talk. It was healing. Afterward, she found me waiting by the door. "Mom," she said with a bright smile, "you shouldn't have hidden in the back." "I wasn't hiding," I replied. I was admiring. She laughed softly, linking her arm through mine as we walked to the car. You taught me everything I know. Maybe, I said. But you lived the lesson. Not long after, Alina met someone new, Marcus. He was the opposite of Travis in every possible way. Kind, grounded, genuine. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he had a quiet confidence that came from knowing who he was, not from trying to prove it. When I met him for the first time, I could tell immediately that his love for Alina was real. He looked at her not as a possession, but as an equal. Months passed, and I began to see a light in my daughter that I hadn't seen in years, the light of peace. When she and Marcus announced their engagement, it didn't fill me with fear or hesitation this time. It filled me with hope. During their small engagement party, Marcus pulled me aside. Mrs. Cooper, he said respectfully. I know you've been through a lot because of what happened before. But I want you to know I'll never hurt her. Not intentionally, not carelessly. I'm not the man who came before me. I looked at him carefully, reading the sincerity in his eyes. If you ever forget that promise, I said gently, just remember I have very good connections in the business world. He laughed. A little nervously, but nodded solemnly. Understood. When the laughter around us grew louder, I excused myself to the porch for a moment of quiet. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. I thought back on everything that had happened, the insults, the humiliation, the unraveling, and the final reckoning. I realized that what began as revenge had evolved into something deeper. It wasn't about showing power. It was about reclaiming dignity and revealing truth. The world hadn't changed much, but I had. I no longer needed to shrink myself to make others comfortable. I no longer felt the need to prove that kindness and strength could coexist. I began mentoring young women in business, widows, single mothers, those starting over after being dismissed or underestimated. They reminded me of who I used to be, strong but uncertain, capable yet doubted. Helping them rediscover their confidence became my quiet mission. And in every success story I witnessed, I felt a piece of my own healing take root. From time to time, I still thought of Travis, not with bitterness but with a sense of strange gratitude. Without him, I might never have remembered who I was. I heard through Alan that he was doing modestly well at his new firm, working diligently, avoiding shortcuts, and treating his colleagues with respect. He'd learned, in the hardest way, the lesson life had tried to give him. That was enough for me. One afternoon, while cleaning out my office, I came across an old leather-bound journal. I hadn't written in it since David's passing. I opened to a blank page and began to write again, not about revenge or pain, but about the journey from humiliation to grace. I wrote about the quiet strength of women who refuse to be defined by others' opinions, about the beauty of restraint, and how silence, when used wisely, can echo louder than anger ever could. When I finished, I signed the last page simply. For every woman who's been underestimated, may you never forget your power. As I closed the journal, sunlight spilled across my desk, catching the framed photo of me, David, and Alina at the beach. I smiled softly. Life had come full circle, not in revenge, but in renewal. And as I closed that journal, I knew my story wasn't one of revenge, it was one of awakening. Years later, people still talk about the woman who turned humiliation into power. Time, as it always does, kept moving forward. The pain, the anger, the lessons, all of it became chapters in a story I carried quietly. One that I shared only when it could help someone else. My life settled into a rhythm of calm purpose. I didn't need noise, applause, or recognition. What I had now was far more valuable: peace, respect, and a legacy worth leaving behind. Alina and Marcus were married in the early fall, in a garden surrounded by soft amber leaves. The ceremony was intimate, no grand displays, no extravagance, just family, friends, and sincerity. As I watched them exchange vows, I felt something I hadn't in years: the stillness of pure happiness. There was no fear that history would repeat itself. Marcus's love for my daughter was evident in every word he spoke. After the ceremony, Alina found me standing beneath a willow tree, gazing at the sky. "Mom," she said softly, slipping her arm through mine, Do you realize how much of this, all of it, happened because of you? I smiled. No, sweetheart. It happened because you found your strength. I just reminded you where to look for it. She laughed gently, tears glistening in her eyes. You do that for everyone, you know. You teach without even trying. Her words lingered with me for days after. I never saw myself as a teacher, just a survivor who happened to learn a few things the hard way. But maybe that's what teaching really is, turning your scars into maps for others. A few months later, Alina and Marcus had their first child, a daughter. They named her June, after David's mother. The day she was born, when I held that tiny baby in my arms, my heart swelled in a way I hadn't felt since the day I first held Alina. Welcome to the world, little one, I whispered. You come from strong women. As I looked into June's eyes, I promised silently that she would grow up never doubting her worth. No one would ever make her feel small. I retired officially that same year. My position on the advisory board was passed to a younger woman I had mentored, a bright, compassionate leader who reminded me of my younger self. She hugged me after my last meeting and said, "You've changed more lives than you know." I smiled and replied, "Then I've done my job." From there, my days became beautifully simple again. Mornings in the garden, afternoons reading or volunteering, evenings spent with family. But even in retirement, my name carried quiet weight in the business community. People still whispered about the widow who taught an entire corporation humility. Some called it poetic justice. I called it balance. I was often invited to speak at conferences, universities, and women's empowerment events. Sometimes I accepted, but I never mentioned Travis or the details of my story. Instead, I spoke about values, dignity, grace, and the strength of silence. I told young professionals that the most powerful people are often the ones who don't need to announce their power. My story became less about vengeance and more about transformation. About how pain, when handled with wisdom, could become purpose. As for Travis, I never saw him again after the gala. But from time to time, I'd hear snippets about him from Alan or mutual acquaintances. Apparently, he had rebuilt his career quietly, moved to another city, and even started mentoring young interns. A different man, Alan once told me. Grounded, humble, respectful. When I heard that, I didn't feel smug or satisfied, just relieved. He had finally learned the lesson life had handed him. That was enough. One winter afternoon, while sitting by the window with a cup of tea, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Mrs. Cooper, you once told me reflection teaches better than destruction. You were right. I've built something honest this time, something real. Thank you for showing me what strength truly looks like. I hope your family is well. T.G. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in my journal between the pages where I'd written about forgiveness. Then I smiled, closed the book, and let it rest. The story had come full circle. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood by the window watching the fading light spill across my garden. The world outside was calm, bathed in amber and gold. I thought about David, about how proud he would be of Alina, of June, of the quiet empire of decency we'd managed to build out of heartache. I whispered softly, "We did it, love. We really did." The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that feels full, not empty. My legacy wasn't written in titles or bank accounts. It was written in strength, in the women who came after me, my daughter, my granddaughter, and every young woman I had guided along the way. Because sometimes, the quietest ones hold the loudest power.